I'm VJ Hamilton and welcome to the Autoimmune Reset, the place for you to learn how to thrive with autoimmune disease and feel empowered to take steps to transform your health to feel better than ever. You can start making changes today to improve your health. So with every episode, my mission is to share with you simple ways to up-level your diet and lifestyle with key learnings from my own journey reversing autoimmune disease and inspirational stories from those who have reset their autoimmune symptoms and are now thriving in life. I suffered from autoimmune disease for over 25 years and now I live symptom-free, and I wish the same for you as well. So thank you for being here and sharing this time with me. Now let's get started. Hello and welcome back to the Autoimmune Reset podcast. I'm your host, VJ Hamilton. I'm a nutritionist, scientist, and expert in autoimmune disease. And as you know, on this show, I like to explore the underlying root cause of chronic illness and autoimmune disease. I'm here to share with you all that I know and all that I have learned in my own journey of overcoming alopecia areata, psoriasis, and chronic fatigue syndrome. And I feel so grateful that I have been symptom-free now for over 9 years, and I wish the same for you as well. I remember when I started listening to podcasts about chronic illness and functional medicine and nutrition, and that was about 15 years ago now. And then I started finding out more about functional medicine. And obviously I retrained as a nutritionist. I already had a science background, but it made such a difference knowing how my body was working, what was affecting me. And I know there is a lot of overwhelm out there. There is so much information and it can feel scary and you just might not know what the next step is. And I would always say, when it comes to that, learn as much as you can, but when it comes to taking action for your health, just take it a step at a time. And honestly, it does add up over time, and even making one small action of change can make such a huge difference. So today we are going to be talking about a condition that I learned about when I started working with clients with autoimmune disease. And I realized that there was symptoms that related to this condition in my own family. And I am sure that this is an underlying issue for my family as well, who have a lot of different autoimmune conditions. And that is a condition called Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome. And I'll be referring to it as Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome throughout the episode, but also EDS. And I want to talk about specifically how it overlaps with autoimmune disease, and most importantly, how to support your body using a root cause approach. Let's start with the basics. Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome is a group of inherited connective tissue disorders, and the most common type is known as hypermobile EDS or HEDS, and it's characterized by joint hypermobility, frequent dislocations, stretchy skin, and soft tissue fragility. But what often gets missed is that EDS isn't just about joints and ligaments, because as you may know, connective tissue is everywhere. There is such a trend at the moment around collagen and its impact on connective tissue, especially with skin health. But connective tissue is everywhere. It's in our organs, our blood vessels, and our fascia, which are absolutely vital for many different systems in the body. So if your joints are lax, I know in my family that a lot of us will have fingers that bend back, and some more than others. I remember growing up and I did gymnastics when I was younger, and being flexible was always seen as a positive. But the truth is, maybe that was showing that there was this underlying issue with connective tissue. It's possible if you have this issue with your connective tissue and your connective tissue is more flexible, it's very possible that your gut lining, your bladder, your vascular system, and even your nervous system are affected too. Now, EDS is not classified as an autoimmune disease, but here's where it gets interesting. Many people with EDS also have autoimmune conditions like Hashimoto's, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, and POTS, which is technically a form of dysautonomia, but it's frequently seen in the autoimmune community generally. So let's go deeper into the why. Why do we see so many people with Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome who also have autoimmune conditions? As you may expect, it's a complex picture, but when we zoom out and look at the body through a systems lens, there are 4 key patterns that emerge, each supported by my clinical experience and emerging research. So let's talk about the first one, which is mast cell activation syndrome. And I can't tell you how many people I am seeing at the moment who have an issue with histamine. I see it in my clients with alopecia areata. I'm seeing it in my clients with rheumatoid arthritis. I'm seeing it in my clients with eczema and psoriasis, and it is so common, and it's actually quite hard to determine whether it is MCAS or if it is to do with the underlying autoimmune condition. But ordinarily, once you get the MCAS under control, you can also get the autoimmune symptoms under control as well. Mast cells are immune cells that live in connective tissue. They're part of the body's front line of defense. So we must think about them as our immune security. They sense danger, and when they're triggered, they release histamine and other inflammatory chemicals that fight off threats. In Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome, particularly the hypermobile EDS, the connective tissue is structurally weaker and more prone to micro-injuries, and this means that mast cells are embedded in this tissue and are constantly being stimulated due to the injury. So it might be that you damaged your knee quite some time ago, but your knee is still flaring up, and that could relate to Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome, because if you have this issue with your connective tissue and your body is recognizing that there is an injury there, then you're more likely to be stimulating your mast cells, and they're going to be more likely to be releasing histamine, and that can cause the swelling, because that histamine response is the allergy response. If you think about allergies, you think about swellings, you think about having lots of mucosal secretions like tears and blocked sinuses, and that can happen in an injury site as well. Mast cells sense friction, they sense tissue damage, they sense tissue instability, and over time they become hyperactive. So even a small stimulation can actually cause a release of histamine, and this is where you have MCAS. It's not just the fact that your body is unable to clear histamine, and that can be an issue in and of itself, but it's just that your cells are actually producing lots and lots of histamine as well. I'm recording this in the middle of springtime. The pollen was very high in the UK yesterday, and a lot of the people I was with were sneezing, and people have told me that they're itching on a night, and these are all signs of higher histamine. And when this is happening and you do have this hyperactivity, it can lead to mast cell activation syndrome. And this is where your body is just responding to danger everywhere. And it can cause symptoms like hives and flushing. It can cause food intolerance and reactions to smells and chemicals. It can cause migraines and brain fog. I'm sure the migraines that I used to experience were related to histamine. It can cause gut issues like nausea and abdominal pain, and generally a sense that your body is always on edge because you are being stimulated all the time. And histamine is linked to anxiety, and when you have higher amounts of histamine, it can cause anxiety as well. But importantly, MCAS is not exclusive to EDS. We also see it frequently in people with autoimmune disease. And why is that the case? Well, it's because chronic immune activation, whether through infections, gut issues, or environmental triggers, can push mast cells into this unstable state. So mast cells often sit in the crossroads between EDS and autoimmunity. Next, let's talk about gut permeability or leaky gut. And this is a big one because your gut lining isn't just a tube, it's a permeable barrier made of cells, tight junctions, and you guessed it, connective tissue, which is made of proteins like collagen, laminin, and fibronectin. And when those are not created or working efficiently, that can promote leaky gut syndrome. In EDS, where connective tissue is also compromised, that gut lining may be inherently weaker. So when you add chronic stress, infections, processed foods, and medications like NSAIDs to the mix, those tight junctions start to loosen. And this is what we call leaky gut. When the gut barrier is compromised, things like partially digested food particles, bacterial fragments like LPS, which is a toxin in the body, and toxins that come from other chemicals and other pathogens can slip into the bloodstream. And that's when your immune system sees those and thinks, what on earth is going on here? And starts to fire up that inflammatory response. And suddenly you've got systemic immune activation. And over time, this can contribute to loss of tolerance to certain foods. It's a complaint that I see time and time again with the clients that I'm working with. They just don't know what to eat. They're reacting to everything. And leaky gut is certainly a huge component of that. You may also have heightened inflammation. You might just feel inflamed. You might have symptoms of inflammation like sore joints or itchy skin or headaches or fatigue or brain fog. There's lots of ways that we can feel inflamed. And it's one of the questions I will ask my clients. What does inflammation feel like to you? And it's surprising the answers I get back because it's different for everybody and everybody will present with inflammation in different ways. When I'm working with clients who have alopecia areata, often they'll say that their scalp feels very inflamed and it can feel very sore, especially just before they have hair loss. And that certainly can be linked to histamine as well. And eventually autoimmune responses, especially in genetic predispositions, can happen when you end up with leaky gut syndrome. It is a major factor in autoimmune disease, not just the breakdown of the gut barrier function, but the breakdown of other barriers, like the barriers in your lungs, the barrier between your brain and your blood, the barrier in your mouth and in your gums. These are all important and they are all reliant on connective tissue. So this area is huge. And I think with time, we're going to see more and more this relationship between connective tissue issues, especially with conditions like EDS and autoimmunity. So in this way, you can see that EDS really can set the stage for leaky gut, and leaky gut can in turn drive autoimmune reactivity. I briefly want to touch on the role of gluten and how gluten can be problematic even without celiac disease, because this often comes up, and it is especially important with people who have suspected Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome or have been diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome. Because here's the thing, you don't have to have celiac disease or test positive for a gluten allergy to be affected by gluten, especially if you have an underlying gut permeability, autoimmune issue or suspected EDS. I have a lot of clients coming to me, they'll do a food sensitivity test and they have no reaction to gluten and they ask me, well, should I go gluten-free? And I have to think about all these other aspects about how gluten can affect the body to understand whether it might be a factor for them outside of a food sensitivity or food allergy. And I don't always recommend gluten-free, but if I suspect that there is something going on in their gut and they potentially have leaky gut, then if they are happy to do so and their relationship with food is positive, then it might be something that I recommend, because there is this connection with gluten as well. And that's that there is this connection between the connective tissue and the gut barrier. So if you suspect that you have EDS or hypermobile traits, then it's likely that your connective tissue is going to be more fragile, and that forms your gut lining. Now, the gut barrier relies on that collagen, laminin, and other structural proteins to hold the tight junctions together. So that's like the mesh of the sieve that keeps the good stuff in and the inflammatory stuff out. But in EDS, this barrier may be inherently weaker. So it's going to be more vulnerable to things like stress, infections, medications, and as well as that, gluten. And gluten, especially a component called gliadin, has been shown to trigger the release of something called zonulin in the gut. And zonulin is a protein that temporarily opens up those tight junctions in the intestinal lining, and that increases permeability. Now, this happens to everyone to some extent, not just those with celiac disease or gluten sensitivity. So it can open your gut lining in an already weakened EDS-related tissue fragility, and gluten may then push it past that tipping point. And that's when you end up with releasing a lot of these different particles and toxins and pathogens into the bloodstream, and that can fire up this inflammatory response. That's why I find stool testing so helpful, because we can look at what is going on in the gut, whether there are these potentially pathogenic bacteria, whether there's a parasite, because it means that if you have leaky gut, you're going to be more affected if you have these imbalances in your gut. One of the first things that I will focus on, especially if I feel this is an issue for my clients, is working on the gut barrier function. And we'll talk about that in a moment. If you don't feel like you have a gluten sensitivity, then that is common because many people don't get obvious symptoms like bloating or diarrhea. I certainly didn't, but you might notice the downstream effects like fatigue, skin flare-ups, brain fog, or increased joint pain days after eating. And that's where a food and symptom journal can be really helpful. It can still be quite hard to identify what's causing your symptoms, especially if you're reacting to a lot of foods, but it can be extremely helpful if you have noticed that you've eaten something and had the same reaction after eating it every time. One of the reactions that I always take note of is whether I wake up with a dull headache. And I found this was the case when I was eating salmon, which is a healthy food and it's full of omega-3s. But I noticed on this particular brand of salmon that I was waking up with a headache. I just noticed it the first time, then I took note the second time. And when it happened the third time, I was like, I'm just not buying that anymore. I don't know what's in it. I don't know what's causing it. It was wild Alaskan salmon. It looked really good. But the truth is, I know that I'm reacting to something in that. So I just don't eat it anymore. And I've changed the brand of that. And that's been absolutely fine. So it wasn't the salmon. It just must have been something else. And when you can start observing your body in that way, it can make such a huge difference. And I know it can be tiresome having to write down your symptoms and your food all the time. It's certainly not what I do anymore. I did do it at the beginning and I found it really helpful. What I do now is when something is off, or I find that, my skin feels a bit itchier, my joints don't feel as strong, then I'm going to start making a note of what I've eaten when I'm not feeling the great, like I did with the headache, and kind of track that and just track one thing rather than tracking everything. But I think at the beginning, when you're just getting started, it is good to maybe have a 3-day food and symptom journal and just see if you can notice any patterns in there. So what can you do if you're dealing with autoimmune symptoms or suspect that you have EDS? Well, you could trial a gluten-free diet for 4 to 6 weeks. There is some evidence that going gluten-free can be problematic for some people if you are not bringing in those higher fiber foods, because gluten has a lot of fiber in it. So it's not just about taking gluten out of the diet and not replacing it. And I certainly wouldn't advise that. And I always think when you're doing these types of elimination protocols, it's best to work with a practitioner. If you take gluten out your diet, you make sure that you replace it with other high fiber foods. See if your symptoms improve. That is going to give you the first piece of evidence that gluten might be a factor in your symptoms, regardless of whether you have celiac disease or gluten sensitivity. And it was certainly the case for me when I first started out. My ankle had swollen. I couldn't really walk. It was very painful. I couldn't get my shoes on to go to work. I went to see a nutritionist, and at the time I already knew from my past medical history that I had an issue with dairy, and they recommended taking gluten out of the diet. This was about, I think it was 12 years ago now. I kind of lose track of the timeline, but it was just as I moved to London. I think it was 2013. And I took the gluten out of my diet, and within days, after having it for 2 weeks, this swollen ankle, I'd been to see different doctors and specialists about my ankle, and then I just took gluten out of the diet, and within 3 days the swelling had gone down. It was such great evidence that it was a factor in my inflammation and in my autoimmune conditions. You can then focus on gut healing and having things like bone broth. Zinc carnosine is a really great supplement to add in. Obviously work with a practitioner if you are thinking about taking any supplements, but that can help with the gut barrier. And I'll be touching on a few other things that you can think about doing at the end of the episode. Quick recap on gluten is that you don't have to have celiac to be affected by gluten. If you do have EDS, then gluten can be a second hit that makes leaky gut worse. And even without digestive symptoms, gluten may drive inflammation or immune reactivity. One of my main symptoms from gluten was anxiety and panic attacks and it affecting my brain and having brain fog. So it's not always about your gut. Next, let's talk about dysautonomia and vagal nerve dysfunction, because this is the third link. And dysautonomia, especially things like POTS and the vagus nerve, play a role in EDS. And people with EDS often struggle with blood pressure regulation, dizziness when standing, and temperature fluctuations. And this reflects a dysregulated autonomic nervous system response. And this is the part of your body that controls all things you don't have to think about, like heart rate, digestion, and immune balance. And the vagus nerve is the main player in your parasympathetic or rest and digest nervous system. And it acts as a kind of anti-inflammatory switch, part of the cholinergic anti-inflammatory pathway. And when vagal tone is low, whether from connective tissue instability in the neck, trauma, chronic stress, or viral infections, your body has a harder time switching off inflammation and the immune system stays on high alert. And this is a big deal in both EDS and autoimmune conditions, and supporting the vagal nerve through breath work, red light therapy, vagus nerve stimulation devices, or even singing and gargling can help restore that inflammatory balance. Low vagal tone is linked to poor digestion, higher inflammation, and immune dysregulation. So for people with EDS or autoimmunity, this is often the missing piece of the puzzle, and it's something that I didn't think about for a very long time. One of the tools I personally use every day now is a device called the NeuroSim. It's a form of a non-invasive vagal nerve stimulation that helps to activate your body's anti-inflammatory response. It's subtle, but I find it extremely powerful. I had a day last week where I was feeling more stressed than normal, and I actually don't know why, but it came up on my Oura ring, and I just put my NeuroSim on, and I had 15 minutes to myself and then started using it whilst I was working. And it was remarkable how quickly it brought down my stress response. And I did feel a lot better after using it. I use it on a daily basis in any case, but when you use it in a reactive way, which it is best to use every day as well, but when you use it in a reactive day, you can certainly see the difference. And over time, it can help shift your body out of that chronic fight or flight state and back into that rest, repair, and regulation. And I've used it for over 6 months now, and I've noticed big improvements in my focus, sleep quality, and stress resilience. And it's especially helpful if you're ADHD inclined like I am. If you are interested in trying it, I do have a code that you can use, which is in the show notes, and you will receive 10% off at checkout. I always say this, I only share tools I use and believe in clinically, and for nervous system support, this is one of the best I've found. When I'm working with clients and I am recommending lifestyle interventions and nutrition and diet recommendations, I realised there was a missing part, and it was this nervous system regulation. And I do refer clients to different therapists, but this is such a great add-on when I'm working with clients. And when I work with clients who are using this in conjunction to my advice, they see huge improvements. So you can find the link to learn more about the NeuroSim and my discount code in the show notes. And finally, let's talk about genetics and immune surveillance, because EDS is rooted in genetic changes that affect the structure and synthesis of collagen and other connective tissue proteins. But these proteins don't just provide scaffolding, they also help to direct how the immune cells move, respond, and repair tissue. Take tenascin X, for example. It's a protein that's involved in both collagen organization and immune regulation. And when it's deficient or defective, as it can be in certain types of EDS, we not only see fragile tissue, but we also see disruptions in how immune cells navigate the body. This means immune cells might not clean up damaged tissue properly. They might stay in places that they shouldn't, or they might start misfiring altogether, attacking the wrong targets. This creates a setting where chronic low-grade inflammation becomes the norm, and the immune system is more likely to get confused to attack self-tissue instead of invaders. And as you know, that is at the heart of autoimmune disease. But before we move on to practical strategies, I want to zoom in on something that often gets overlooked, and that's your family history, not just of autoimmunity, but of connective tissue traits. And I can tell you from both personal personal and clinical practice, it's often not a coincidence. For example, I have scoliosis, which is a curvature of the spine that was chalked up as one of those things when I was growing up. But now, knowing what I do about Ehlers-Danlos and hypermobility, it's clear it wasn't random. And I was lucky to discover Pilates again about 12 years ago, and I started practicing Pilates reformer. I then trained as a Pilates instructor. That is such a great thing to do if you have a weakened connective tissue issue, which I'm pretty sure I do. I grew an inch when I started doing Pilates, and it just strengthened everything. And I didn't even know I had scoliosis until I went to train as a Pilates instructor, because there is a lot more to Pilates than people realize, and it is understanding people's bodies and understanding people's spines and understanding people's alignment. And we would do these assessments on each other, and I would do them on clients as well. And straight away, when the Pilates instructor who was leading the course looked at my spine, she mentioned I had scoliosis. And I actually see this in some of my other family members as well. And also my nephew had 3 ACL injuries, which are significant tears in the ligament that stabilize the knee. And he was still in his teens at the time. And again, that kind of repeated joint trauma doesn't usually happen unless there's an underlying structural vulnerability. And it's surprising, since this happened to my nephew, I've worked with many clients who have come to me with an autoimmune condition, and they have a previous issue with their knees, whether it is an ACL injury or a different type of injury. And I expect this is because of the link between connective tissue and autoimmune disease. And when you look more closely at the rest of my family, there are these clicky hips, we have fingers that bend backwards, we have joints that subluxate, and a lot of flexibility that we used to think was just quirky or lucky, but it's often hypermobility. And in the context of fatigue, pain, gut issues, or autoimmunity, it's relevant. And these are the kind of patterns that often go unrecognized for decades, because we've been trained to think of a diagnosis as isolated, but the connective tissue traits that run in families may be key clues to understanding the full picture. So if you're listening thinking, my child has flat feet and fatigue, my sister has IBS and stretchy skin, or my joint always ached and I just thought I was clumsy, these might be the missing pieces of the same puzzle, and recognizing that pattern can be empowering. It doesn't mean something is wrong in your family, it means you've inherited a body that needs a slightly different type of care, and that knowledge can help support it better before the symptoms escalate. Let's talk about the common symptoms. You might be wondering right now, could I have this? Is there a chance that Ehlers-Danlos traits are part of my story too, even if I've never been diagnosed? Well, here's the thing. Many people living with autoimmune disease have signs of connective tissue dysfunction that are missed or dismissed for years. They've often been told that they're just clumsy, sensitive, or anxious, but when we take a step back and look at the full picture, certain patterns start to emerge. Here are some of the most common ones that I see in clinic. First are frequent sprains, subluxations, or joint pain without major injuries. You might be someone who twisted your ankle every term at school, or dislocated your shoulder just from rolling over in bed. Maybe you've been told you're hypermobile or double jointed, but no one ever explained what that meant for your overall health. The next is elastic or fragile skin that bruises easily. You notice bruises on your legs but can't remember bumping into anything. Or maybe you have scars that heal in unusual ways, or they're wide or soft. These subtle features are actually important diagnostic clues. You might have digestive issues that never really resolve, like bloating, reflux, or gastroparesis. I often see clients who've been through multiple diets, tests, even endoscopies, but still feel like food just sits in their stomach, and that's because connective tissue also affects gut motility and the strength of your digestive tract walls. That you might feel dizzy when standing, have a racing heart, or intolerance to heat, especially in the morning, and these are signs of dysautonomia, often linked to POTS. You might have been told it's anxiety or dehydration, but if it happens regularly, it could be a sign your nervous system isn't regulating properly. There is fatigue, brain fog that feels systemic, not just lifestyle related. This isn't just feeling tired from a late night. It's the kind of fatigue that feels like your body is running on 30% battery even after a full night's sleep. And that's the distinction I often make between chronic fatigue and tiredness. If you have a full night's sleep, are you feeling great in the morning, or are you still feeling tired? And it often flares with hormonal changes, infections, or stress. And then there are those allergy-like reactions to foods, smells, or supplements, even when tests come back normal. You might flush after wine, get itchy from certain skincare products, or feel jittery after a multivitamin. This hypersensitivity can be a sign of mast cell activation, which is common in both EDS and autoimmune conditions. And here's the key. Most people don't present with just one of these things. It's the pattern that matters. It's the combination of joint issues, fatigue, gut dysfunction, and immune reactivity that points towards something systemic. So if it's resonating, please don't brush it off. It doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It means your body might just have a different set of needs, a different kind of resilience that can be supported once you understand the root cause. And I promise there are ways to support your body that don't involve chasing diagnosis and managing symptoms in isolation. So let's take a step back. The conventional approach tends to isolate in each condition. You've got EDS, that's genetic, or you've got autoimmune thyroid, that's separate, or you've got IBS, go see a gastroenterologist, or you're anxious, so take this medication. But we know this doesn't reflect how the body works. It's systemic and it's interconnected. And in a root cause model, we ask, what's overburdening the immune system? Where are the barriers breaking down? What is the body trying to protect itself from? And with EDS and autoimmunity, I focus on 5 core symptoms. The first is gut integrity, because the gut lining is compromised, which creates issues with immune tolerance. And I often use GI testing to look at dysbiosis, inflammation, and potential pathogens. Next, we look at the nervous system, and nervous system regulation is absolutely key. It's the foundation that we can then build on, and vagal nerve support is critical. Things like red light therapy, the neurosim, breath work, lymphatic drainage can help. And in my case, vagal stimulation has been a game changer in my stress levels and in my sleep. Then we have mast cell stability. We can eat low histamine diets, bring in nutrients like quercetin or a DAO enzyme, which can help clear the histamine. And we often work here first to reduce reactivity. Then there's the detox pathways, and supporting your detox is absolutely crucial. Liver and lymphatic support is key. Remember, connective tissue carries waste products. If your lymph is sluggish, the inflammation is going to linger. And lastly, nutrient sufficiency, especially vitamin C, magnesium, glycine, and proline, which all act to support collagen synthesis and immune modulation. Okay, so let's move into what actually helps. And these are the tools and strategies I come back to again and again when I'm working with clients who live with EDS traits and autoimmune disease. And I'll share not just what they are, but how to fit them into your life without feeling overwhelmed. First, there is bone broth and gelatin-rich foods, because bone broth is one of the most nourishing, accessible tools we have. It's rich in glycine, glutamine, and collagen-building amino acids. I personally like to use Oza Organics bone broth. It's slow-cooked and really high quality, and I often sip it in a mug in the morning and use it as a base for soups, stews, and even cooking wild rice. You can get 10% off with the code, which is in my show notes. And if you prefer something sweet, make a simple gelatin gummy with grass-fed gelatin, blended berries, lemon juice, and honey. And they're fun, supportive, and an easy way to get the gelatin into the gut. They're particularly great for children as well. And if you're plant-based or prefer a protein, collagen peptides or glycine powder stirred into teas or smoothies can also work really well. Next, there are slow-cooked meats and stews, which are gentler on the digestion. They're rich in iron, zinc, and amino acids, and much easier to tolerate if your gut is reactive. Think of lamb shoulder, turkey thigh, or beef shin, and you can cook that slowly with root vegetables and herbs. It's such a simple meal to make, and you can use an instant pot to make it even easier for yourself. I recommend making a batch once a week, and you can freeze portions as well, so it's ideal for days when cooking feels like too much. Then you can consider gluten and dairy removal if you've got gut permeability, histamine intolerance, or frequent immune flares, removing gluten and dairy can make a huge difference. It's not always the answer, but it can be for some. This doesn't have to be an all or nothing. You can start by just changing one meal a day. I often find clients will come to me and they're consuming gluten in every meal, or they're consuming dairy in every meal, and just taking that and swapping that. In the first instance, as I said, take it on a step-by-step basis. That can make a big difference. And you can swap regular bread for gluten-free sourdough, or try flaxseed or seed crackers, and use almond or coconut milk in smoothies or porridge instead. I love tahini and nutritional yeast in dressings instead of cheese, and it adds that rich flavour without triggering inflammation. And then gentle supportive movement, which can be extremely beneficial if you have hypermobility. The goal is circulation and strength, not impact or intensity. Pilates, swimming and reformer Pilates are fantastic for joint support, and they've made a huge difference in my own health and core strength. You can also buy a mini trampoline or rebounder. I have one in my cupboard. I've been meaning to get it out for a long time. So now I'm talking to you about it. I'm going to get it out and start using it again. And just a few minutes at a time can support lymph flow and your vagus nerve. And on low energy days, legs up against the wall for 10 minutes can make such a difference. It sounds simple, but it's incredibly calming for the nervous system. And then we have certain supplements which should only ever be followed under the guidance of your practitioner, but you could take liposomal vitamin C, which supports collagen production and immune health, and it's especially important if you have connective tissue which needs repair. There's zinc carnosine, which I've already mentioned, which is excellent for the gut lining, and it's particularly good to use if there's leaky gut or reflux. You can add in magnesium glycinate, which is my go-to for muscle support, pain relief and sleep. And I recommend using Body Bio's magnesium here. It's well absorbed and very gentle, and you'll find the link to that in the show notes. Glycine powder and collagen peptides are also helpful for tissue healing and also help to calm the nervous system. And I often suggest glycine before bed. I know recently a client said that they were taking this and it actually caused them to feel more awake. So again, just monitor how it's making you feel. But for most people, having glycine or collagen before bed can really help to calm your nervous system. And if there's gut inflammation or MCAS involvement, then body biobutyrate can also be helpful because it supports the gut lining and immune modulation. And again, you'll find a link to that in the show notes. It's always best to work with a practitioner to individualize your supplements, but here are a few that come up time and time again in my clinic. So living with EDS and autoimmunity can be overwhelming. You may have been dismissed as just anxious or told it's all in your head, and I know that happened to me for many, many years and still happens to me today, but your symptoms are real and there is a path to greater stability. It starts with slowing down, supporting your body system by system, and knowing that healing isn't linear, but it is possible. If this episode resonates, come to join us in the Autoimmune Forum. I'll be sharing some tools over there on how to support your nervous system and your mast cells. On top of that, I have a free Q&A next week all around food reactions. It's at 12:45 p.m. UK time on Wednesday, the 14th of May, 2025. I'd love to see you over there. You can join the forum and I will be going live directly in the forum and answering all your questions. If you have any questions that you'd like me to answer, feel free to go over to my Instagram account, which is at the Autoimmunity Nutritionist, and I will make sure that I answer your questions in the Q&A. So thanks for listening to the Autoimmune Reset. If you've enjoyed the episode, I'd love it if you could rate and review the podcast so that it helps others find this information too. And remember, if you are experiencing these symptoms, your body is asking you for something. So let's help figure out what it is. Don't be concerned, be grateful, because you can be proactive when you start to recognize these symptoms, and there are many things that you can do about it as well. So have a fantastic rest of your weekend. I look forward to speaking and hopefully seeing you next week. If not, have a great week ahead, and I look forward to speaking to you soon. Take care. Thank you very much for joining me today on the Autoimmune Reset. I really hope you enjoyed the discussion, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast so that you never miss an episode. And if you liked it, I would hugely appreciate a review on iTunes, as it helps me understand what you like about the podcast and to help share the information with more people. I'm excited to speak to you next time. And remember, you have the power to take the reins on your health. So keep the faith and celebrate the small wins. Until next time.